there is a hush before the descent, when the chattering mind, awash in the noise of 1,000 little distractions, falls silent. In that silence, reality reveals itself not as a puzzle to be solved, but as a wound that simply remains. There is no one to applaud your awakening, and no solace in applause. You stand, alone, as every sentient creature must, at the edge of the night, stripped of pretense, unadorned by purpose. The world persists, stone, sky, rain, indifferent and imperishable. All the myths of meaning dissolve. The bright scaffolding of hope and progress, which once held up the soul like a child's drawing tacked to a crumbling wall, gives way. You feel the floor drop out. The heart, untethered, searches for footing and finds only emptiness, a vacancy at the core. This is not the catastrophe we are warned of, but the natural gravity of truth. Beneath every act of striving, every trembling prayer for significance, the same void murmurs. There is no reason for any of it, and never was. The human animal flails against this recognition. It is easier to believe in a sky written with invisible scripts, in fates and destinies, in some far-off reward for suffering. How sweet the narcotic of hope, and how bitter the taste when hope fails. The will, insatiable and blind, gnaws at its own fetters, asking always for more love, more time, more certainty, more pleasure, never suspecting that the wound is bottomless. We dream in colors of fulfillment and awaken in grey rooms of disappointment. Suffering is not the exception but the rule, a tide beneath the surface that shapes every life. The child is born crying, the old man closes his eyes in regret. In between, we fashion rituals, stories, and systems, draping the bones of existence with meaning as a mourner dresses the dead. For all our efforts, the ache remains. Hunger of the flesh, ache of the spirit, the dull abrasion of repetition. Each day repeats the same riddle, unanswerable and unyielding. We exhaust ourselves on the treadmill of desire, imagining that somewhere, someday, the world will offer up a reason for itself. How quietly the truth enters, not with a thunderclap, but with the stillness of midnight. What if there is no answer, and the question itself is the only companion? What if the universe, vast and cold, neither notices nor cares? The narratives of progress and improvement, personal, social, spiritual, are revealed as fragile masks. The most painful liberation is the realization that no one is coming to save us, and there is nothing to be saved for. What is left when meaning is stripped away? The bare, unadorned moment, heavy with futility, the beauty of a raindrop, perfect and pointless. The silence that falls when words run out. To witness this is to know the exquisite sharpness of being life as ache, not adventure, consciousness as curse, not crown. Yet suffering, that inescapable companion, brings with it a strange clarity. To see the world as it is, shorn of fantasy and false comfort, is to glimpse the sublime. Pain is the price of lucidity, anguish the toll for vision. The heart, battered and bruised, discovers an austere kind of dignity, not in victory, but in surrender. You kneel at the altar of reality, and find there is nothing to worship but the nothingness itself. All human culture arises as a monument to this horror vacui, the terror of the void. We build civilizations not out of wisdom, but out of fear. Fear of the silence, fear of the darkness that lies in wait beyond the reach of language. Religion, art, and philosophy, each a trembling hand held out toward the abyss. Each a way of averting the eyes, if only for a moment. We dance around the absence, dressing it in finery and song, hoping to distract ourselves from its unblinking gaze. But the abyss does not blink. It is always present, patient and absolute. All that is born falls into it eventually. Every love becomes a memory, every achievement dust. The great and the small, the virtuous and the vile, are leveled by time, leveled by death. The will, unappeasable and proud, is finally broken not by failure, but by futility. To struggle is to perpetuate suffering. To surrender is to see clearly. We spend our lives in pursuit of happiness, of wealth, of recognition, of meaning itself, yet each pursuit is a circle. The object of desire recedes as we approach, revealing its emptiness when attained. The feast becomes famine. The embrace becomes absence. The victory becomes void. What is this hunger that nothing can satisfy? It is the will to live, the impulse that keeps the world turning, blind to its own pointlessness. Modernity promises distraction in place of fulfillment, novelty in place of meaning. Screens flicker, cities buzz, the noise never ceases. But beneath it all, the old suffering persists, dressed now in new costumes. Anxiety, alienation, a weariness that sleep cannot touch. We are lonelier than ever, surrounded by images, starving for substance. The world becomes a mirror reflecting nothing but our own frantic hunger. There is a kind of peace that comes with disillusionment, a stillness at the heart of despair. When all the striving ends, when the machinery of hope is dismantled, a quiet descends. The world is no longer an enemy to be conquered, nor a puzzle to be solved. It is simply there, in its mute indifference. The self, once swollen with dreams, shrinks back to its proper size, a brief flame in the darkness, neither cursed nor blessed. In this space, without illusions, the old questions lose their urgency. Why am I here? What is the point? The questions fall away, like autumn leaves in a wind that does not care. There is only the bare fact of being, unaccompanied by narrative, untouched by promise. The pain does not vanish, but it changes shape. It becomes quieter, more precise, a cold light rather than a burning fire. Sometimes, in the long watches of the night, the ache gives way to a kind of wonder. How strange it is to be conscious at all, to feel and know, even if only sorrow. The universe is silent, but the silence itself is not empty. It is full of the possibility of awareness, the subtle ache of existence. To witness this is not to be comforted, but to be released from the tyranny of purpose, from the madness of hope. Every human heart, sooner or later, is broken by the world. This is the one certainty, the quiet law written in the marrow of our bones. We love, we lose, we hope, we are disappointed, we strive, we fail. The wise do not deny this, nor seek to escape it. They let the wound remain open, for in the wound is the only truth the world affords. The rest is pretense and panic. The stories we tell ourselves of destiny, of meaning, of cosmic justice, are paper boats on a raging sea. They float for a moment, then vanish. To cling to them is to be dragged under. To release them is to float free, not because the sea is safe, but because it is real. The reality of suffering, faced without illusion, is the only freedom possible in a world without meaning. There is a poetry in resignation, a grace in accepting the futility of it all. The bird sings not for an audience, but because it must. The tree grows without asking why. The river flows and the stone endures. So, too, does the human heart beat out its brief time, not in search of significance, but in silent acknowledgement of its own smallness. The light fades, the room grows cold. Every life narrows to this, a consciousness flickering in the dark, seeking comfort where there is none, until even the search dissolves. To see this clearly is not to despair, but to awaken. The world is empty, but in its emptiness there is space for truth. Suffering persists, but it is no longer an outrage. It is simply the cost of being awake, the price of existence. The will, for so long the tormentor, grows quiet. What remains is not happiness, but a kind of sobriety, a standing in the rain without complaint, a looking into the darkness without flinching. Human love, too, is transformed by this clarity. No longer the promise of salvation, it becomes instead a recognition of shared sorrow. To love is to suffer together, to see in the other the same wound, the same yearning for meaning where none exists. Compassion is born not out of hope, but out of solidarity in the face of futility. The wisdom of surrender is not resignation to fate, but an end to resistance against reality. There is no grand plan, no hidden order. The universe moves according to laws that do not care, and the self is a brief ripple in the indifferent sea. To bow before this is to be free, not because suffering ends, but because illusion does. Modern life, with its endless demands for positivity and progress, is an elaborate denial of this fact. We are told to be grateful, to strive, to manifest our desires, as if the world owed us meaning. But the world owes nothing. The wise see this and cease to demand. The wise accept the gift of nothingness. In the end, all words fall silent. The soul, weary of explanations, lets go. What remains is the quiet clarity of being, the gentle indifference of a world that never asked for us, but allowed us, for a moment, to see and to feel. There is no meaning, and that is the gift. The burden of significance falls away. What is left is the simple fact of existence, the cool touch of truth in the palm of the hand. The candle burns down, the shadows lengthen, the question of meaning disappears, and with it, the need for consolation. There is only the stillness, the presence, the emptiness that is also fullness. The self dissolves, the world remains, and in that dissolution, there is the strange peace of having seen the truth and needing nothing more. There is a secret beneath every smile, a silence beneath every word. The world teaches us to hide our wounds, to present a mask polished and untroubled, as though suffering were a stain to be removed and not the ground of being itself. In this quiet, a shadow grows. Each gesture of denial deepens the solitude. The self learns to avert its gaze from the abyss, but the abyss is patient, waiting in the eyes of strangers and the hush that follows laughter. The architecture of illusion is intricate and resilient. We build identities out of memory and longing, fashioning purpose from the broken fragments of desire. Each ambition, each attachment is a slender thread tying us to the wheel of suffering, the ceaseless movement of wanting and fearing loss. The world applauds this struggle, calls it life, but in truth, it is only the repetition of the same hunger in ever-changing forms. The object may differ, but the ache is always the same. Suffering moves like a cold river through the years. Its waters change, yet the chill endures. Youth believes pain is an enemy to be conquered, a temporary exile from some imagined realm of peace. But age teaches otherwise. Pain is not the exception, but the constant joy, the rare, flickering visitor. To grasp this is to be liberated from expectation, to watch happiness come and go as one watches the weather, with detachment and a kind of sad amusement. The will, left unexamined, becomes a tyrant. It drives the heart into new pursuits, ever unsatisfied, ever restless. The promise of fulfillment is a mirage shimmering on the horizon, never approached, never attained. The more the will acquires, the more it invents new needs, new lacks. In the silent hours, the futility becomes clear. The world is not a banquet for the soul, but a ceaseless hunger that devours itself. We are haunted by the illusion that suffering must have a reason, that pain can be justified if only we endure it long enough or interpret it wisely. But suffering is elemental, not punishment or lesson, only fact. To suffer is to exist. To seek meaning in pain is to court further delusion. True freedom arises when the mind ceases its desperate search for significance, when it accepts suffering as the first and last reality. Detachment is not coldness, but a gentle withdrawing from the theater of dreams. It is the recognition that every attachment is a bargain with time, every joy a prelude to loss. The wise do not harden their hearts, but loosen their grip. They love with eyes open, knowing the fragility of all things, knowing that the hands which hold will one day release, and that this release is not failure but fulfillment of the law of transience. Modernity, intoxicated by progress, multiplies distractions. The marketplace is filled with remedies for emptiness, assurances that suffering can be evaded with the right purchase, the right thought, the right technology. Yet, beneath the fluorescence, the ancient ache persists. The world is fuller, yet emptier, more connected, yet lonelier. We become strangers, not only to each other, but to ourselves, unable to sit quietly in the company of our own sorrow. To see through the spectacle is not to be immune to pain, but to be honest in its presence. The faces around us wear the same mask of composure, but behind the eyes, the same wound pulses. The fiction of personal uniqueness gives way to a solidarity of suffering. In the hush of shared sorrow, something deeper than comfort arises, a recognition of the kinship of all beings, born into the night without guide or guarantee. The wise do not seek escape, but surrender. In resignation, there is clarity. No longer chasing phantoms, no longer bargaining with fate. the self stands naked before the world, unashamed of its frailty. The burden of hope is set aside, and in its place, a strange lightness, the freedom of expecting nothing, of demanding nothing from a universe that is not ours to command. Every moment is hollowed by impermanence. The laughter of a child, the touch of a hand, the softness of a voice, all are poised on the brink of disappearance. This knowledge stings, but it also sanctifies the ordinary, investing each passing hour with the dignity of the doomed. To see the world thus is to love without clinging, to care without illusion, to mourn without bitterness. There is a beauty found only in the shadow, a purity that shines from beneath the ruins of ambition. The heart, freed from the tyranny of expectation, becomes receptive to the quiet music of existence. The rustle of leaves, the hush of twilight, the stillness before sleep, these become enough. There is nothing more to seek, nothing more to fear. The emptiness is complete, and in its completion it is peaceful. As the will loosens, the self grows smaller, less important, and the world grows larger, more mysterious. The boundary between inner and outer, between self and world, becomes thin as breath. There is no longer a battle to be won, or a meaning to be captured. There is only the silent witness, the awareness that remains when desire has burned itself out. Thus, in detachment, suffering is not abolished but accepted, not explained but endured. Illusion dissolves, and what is left is the quiet dignity of being alive without why, a consciousness without anchor. The river flows on, indifferent and eternal, and the self, like a fallen leaf, is carried gently in its current, content at last to drift. Beneath the thin shell of everyday necessity, the soul senses a disquiet that cannot be spoken. The day proceeds, task performed, faces greeted, gestures repeated, yet all is tinged with a faint estrangement, as if one moves through the world behind glass. The mind, trained to pursue, finds only the repetition of emptiness. The heart, trained to hope, discovers only the dull ache of incompletion. Shadows lengthen even in the midst of sunlight. To stand apart from the flow of desire is not an act of will, but an awakening to the futility of will itself. The ceaseless agitation, the relentless craving, the restless reaching, these are not the signs of life, but of a mind fleeing itself. How quietly despair builds, not in sudden storms, but as a slow, unrelenting drip. Suffering is patient, wearing down resistance grain by grain, until even hope seems a kind of fatigue. The promise of tomorrow becomes a burden, heavy as stone, and memory grows sharp, pricking the illusion of progress. The world's pleasures, so luminous from afar, reveal their hollowness upon arrival. The banquet is always less than anticipated. The music fades into silence. The warmth of embrace gives way to solitude's chill. Even beauty, that most subtle seduction, slips away as soon as it is grasped. The painted sky, the trembling leaf, the soft murmur of voices at dusk all pass, leaving only the faintest trace in the soul, a longing for something that was never quite possessed. Human connection, so often exalted, is fraught with misunderstanding and the inevitability of separation. We reach for each other across the chasm of isolation, each gesture tinged with the knowledge that all unions are temporary, all intimacy haunted by the shadow of parting. To love is to consent to loss. To care is to risk the pain of abandonment or death. Yet, even knowing this, the heart persists, compelled not by reason, but by the same blind necessity that drives all creatures into the snare of life. This is the law of existence, that every joy is undermined by the certainty of its ending. The greater the happiness, the greater the terror of its loss. The mind recoils from this truth, devising rituals and diversions, but the fragile edifice cracks beneath the weight of time. We are each condemned to carry our own sorrow, unshareable in its totality, and to witness the sorrow of others with the helplessness of a dreamer trapped in a labyrinth of shadows. What passes for wisdom in the world is often only cleverness at forgetting. The philosopher, if honest, refuses the comforts of oblivion. To look without flinching upon the tragedy of being, this is the only clarity worth seeking. The child, unburdened by the future, feels pain in the present alone. The adult, burdened by memory and anticipation, suffers 1,000 deaths before the end. How much of life is spent in the effort to escape this double bind, and how rarely is it admitted that escape is impossible? Yet there is a strange sweetness in this surrender, to accept the pain, to recognize illusion for what it is, to detach from the fever of desire. This is not the extinction of feeling, but its purification. In the absence of hope, there is a new kind of openness, a tenderness born not of expectation, but of acceptance. The world no longer promises, and so it no longer betrays. The sky grows wide, the silence deep, and the heart finds peace not in fulfillment, but in the end of the need to be fulfilled. Suffering, seen clearly, strips away all pretension. It reveals the self as small, contingent, unremarkable one among countless others, destined to perish and be forgotten. The ego, so carefully constructed, is dissolved in the acid of pain. What remains is not despair, but humility, not emptiness, but a spaciousness in which all things appear as they are, without adornment or justification. The world is neither cruel nor kind, but simply indifferent, and in that indifference there is an equality, a stillness that transcends all value. Detachment is not a wall, but a window. Through it, the endless movement of the world can be observed with calm. The birth of a child, the decay of a building, the passing of the seasons, all are seen as variations of a single melody, beautiful and tragic in their inevitability. Nothing is withheld, nothing is demanded. The soul is free to witness, to mourn, to love without illusion, and to let go without regret. There are moments, rare and fleeting, when the burden lifts. In the hush before dawn, in the solitude of a deserted street, in the quiet after tears, the futility of all things becomes luminous. The very absence of purpose reveals a deeper order, not of design, but of necessity. The heart beats, the breath flows, the mind rests in its own silence. In such moments, suffering is not abolished, but it is joined by a feeling of vastness, of dissolution into something larger than the self. It is here, in the abandonment of meaning, that a new kind of meaningless beauty appears. The world, stripped of promise, becomes precious in its transience. Every gesture, every glance, every breath is fragile, irretrievable. There is nothing to gain and nothing to lose, and so everything matters in its insignificance. The self is neither exalted nor despised, but allowed to vanish into the gentle anonymity of existence. To endure the world without illusion is to live in the shadow of death, not as a threat, but as a certainty that gives shape to all things. Each joy is an echo, each sorrow a refrain. The wheel turns, the seasons pass, and life unfolds as it must, without plan, without mercy, without malice. The wise learn not to resist, but to accompany the movement with a quiet mind and a softened heart. There is a kinship in suffering, a commonality deeper than all divisions. The stranger passing on the street, the friend sitting in silence, the animal shivering in the cold, each is marked by the same condition, the same exposure to loss. Compassion is not a virtue, but a recognition. All are wounded, all are alone, all are passing through the same night. In this awareness, the boundaries of the self dissolve, and sorrow becomes a bond rather than a barrier. The last illusion to fall is the illusion of significance. The universe, vast and impassive, offers no answer to the soul's questions. There is only the blank stare of eternity, the indifferent passage of time. Yet, in the face of this, there is a dignity in simply being, in enduring, in bearing witness. The candle burns, not because it hopes to illuminate the world, but because it cannot do otherwise. When all is said and done, what remains is silence. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of acceptance. The heart, no longer clamoring for meaning, rests in the presence of what is. Suffering continues, but it no longer accuses. Desire persists, but it no longer commands. The world is allowed to be as it is, fleeting, painful, indifferent, and the soul, in recognizing this, finds the strange peace of resignation. In the dim corridors of thought, where language falters and longing dies, the world becomes what it always was, a pale reflection in a mirror that cares nothing for the one who gazes. The years accumulate like dust on untouched window sills. Memories, once vivid and demanding, soften to a gentle ache, receding into the hush of things that never truly belonged. The parade of days, so urgent in their passing, now drift as leaves carried by a river whose destination is neither questioned nor known. No summons arrives, no revelation breaks the silence. What remains is the unyielding texture of the present, each moment heavy with the fullness of its own insignificance. Every hope, every fear, every name whispered in the dark has faded into the background music of being. The longing that drove the heart has exhausted itself, like wind losing its strength against unmoving stone. There is only the world as it is unsparing, unyielding, and indifferent to all protest. Here, resignation is not defeat, but a surrender so complete that the self itself dissolves. The horizon no longer beckons. There are no more distant shores, no secret meanings coded in the sky. The hands fall open, empty, and the eyes, so long searching, finally rest. The body, too, grows light as the will releases its grip. The ache of striving fades, leaving a vacancy through which a different kind of peace drifts, pale and unbidden. This peace is not pleasure. It is not the conquest of sorrow, nor the arrival of joy, but the stillness that follows the exhaustion of all desire. It arrives not as comfort, but as clarity. The cool quiet after the tempest has spent its rage. There is no grandeur in it, no promise of redemption. It is simply what remains when there is nothing left to lose, an emptiness untroubled by the memory of fullness. Within this emptiness, suffering persists, but it has changed. No longer a personal torment, it becomes the quiet current running through all things. The pain of existence is no longer an outrage to be corrected, but a condition to be observed, a signature that marks every living thing as kin. Compassion grows in this soil, not as a virtue, but as an involuntary response to the shared wound at the center of being. One's own sorrow ceases to be unique. It merges with the slow, subterranean river of universal grief. There is no transcendence, no final awakening, only the patient illumination of what has always been true. The world's beauty does not vanish, but it is now woven through with a trembling fragility, every petal and breath shadowed by impermanence. The moon, the rain, the silent rooms, these are all more dear, precisely because they ask for nothing and give nothing in return. They are witnesses to a presence that is no one's possession, and which will endure long after all memories fade. In the silence, the mind ceases to measure and compare. The ache for meaning subsides into the background, a persistent hum, but no longer a command. All judgments grow faint. The notion of a better life, a different fate, becomes an old superstition. What is left is simple attention, bare, patient, and honest. Suffering has hollowed out a space, and in that vacancy, the self is not repaired, but finally let go. Life drifts by, untethered from hope. There is sorrow, but the bitterness is gone. There is solitude, but not abandonment. There is pain, but without protest. All things recede, yet in their receding reveal the calm expanse of what endures without reason or requirement. The heart, once frantic for answers, learns the language of silence. Each breath is enough. Each shadow is allowed to remain. The will, long the engine of suffering, grows faint. Its demands grown soft as grass under morning fog. To exist is to surrender. To endure is to allow the world to pass through, without grasping and without resistance. The world's illusions drift by, and the eyes neither follow nor turn away. There is nothing to hold, nothing to fear, nothing to seek. Only the silent knowing, this is how it is. As the final hour draws near, the soul is neither afraid nor eager. There is no tally to be reckoned, no legacy to defend. The world, immense and indifferent, has no place for triumph or defeat. The candle gutters in the empty room. The wind moves through the leaves. The shadows deepen. Nothing remains but the barest murmur of being, persistent and unadorned. So suffering, once feared as the enemy, is revealed as the ground beneath all longing. The illusion of meaning gives way to a lucid tranquility. Detachment is not escape, but a gentle erasure of self in the face of what cannot be changed. To see clearly is to release, and, in releasing, to dissolve. There is no end, only a gradual fading desire falling silent, questions losing their urgency, the world slipping quietly from grasp. In this final stillness, the last illusion disappears. What remains is not peace, nor sorrow, but the soft, anonymous hush of reality itself. And in that hush, the soul vanishes, and the candle of longing is extinguished, leaving only the quiet gift of nothingness